Chapter 1. The discrepancy. The report I am about to read to you was never filed. I want to be precise about that, because precision is what I do, what I did, and I am going to hold on to that habit for as long as I can, which may not be much longer. My name is Miriam Voss. For 6 years, I worked as collections registrar at the Caldwell Regional Museum of Art and Natural History in Caldwell, Ohio. I held a master's degree in museum studies from a program you've probably never heard of, in a city I moved to because they offered me a partial scholarship. I was 25 and believed that credentials would become jobs if I collected enough of them. The degree became a job. The job became a career. The career became a system I was very good at maintaining and not much good at questioning. My job, in plain terms, was to know where everything was. The museum held roughly 14,000 objects across 3 permanent collection areas and an average of 4 traveling exhibits per year. Every object had an accession number, a code really formatted as an institution prefix, a 4-digit year, and a 4-digit sequence number. CDW for Caldwell. CDW -2019 -0117 is a mid-century ceramic picture from the Appalachian Craft Collection. CDW -1962 -003 is the first object the museum ever formally acquired. A surveyor's transit from the county's founding that sits in a glass case near the main entrance and that nobody ever looks at except to confirm it. It's still there. I looked at it every morning on my way in. I am not sure why. Habit, maybe. Or the same impulse that makes you check that you turned the stove off, even though you remember turning it off. Confirmation that the baseline was still intact. The annual physical audit started the second Monday of October, as it always did. We were behind on the digitization project. We were always behind on the digitization project, which meant the photographic records for a significant portion of the pre-negative 1990 collection were still the original 35mm slides and prints, rather than high-resolution digital scans. Part of my audit procedure involved cross-referencing the photographic record against the physical object. Walk the shelf, confirm the accession label, check against the image on file, log the comparison. It is about as interesting as it sounds. I have done it 6 times. I have found, across all 6 annual audits combined, 11 genuine discrepancies, 9 of which turned out to be misfiles, one of which was a legitimate loss traced eventually to an outgoing loan that hadn't been properly logged, and one of which was a deaccession that had been approved verbally but never processed in the system. 11 discrepancies across 14,000 objects across 6 years. My department had a clean record. I was good at this, which is why, when I flagged CDW -1987 -0042 on a Wednesday morning in the 3rd week of October, I was not particularly concerned. The accession number decoded as follows: CDW for Caldwell, 1987 for the acquisition year, 0042 for sequence position 42 in that year's intake. The catalogue record described the object as a pale composite cylinder, approximately 22 centimeters in height, 8 centimeters in diameter, provenance uncertain, donated in 1987 by Vaulted Holdings LLC via estate liquidation. The material classification field said mixed media, exact composition unknown. The condition category said stable. The location field said W2C, row 4, shelf 3, wing 2, cabinet row 4, shelf 3, in the main deep storage area. I walked to W2C. I found cabinet row 4. I found shelf 3. I found the accession label, embossed white text on black archival board, small and neat, attached with reversible adhesive in the upper left corner of the shelf board. I found the label for CDW -1987 -0042, correctly placed, correctly formatted. I did not find the object. This was not immediately alarming. Objects get moved. Objects get pulled for comparison, cleaning, or loan review and returned to the wrong shelf. I walked the surrounding shelves. I walked the entire cabinet row. I checked the adjacent rows. I spent about 40 minutes doing what I always do, looking carefully before concluding that careful looking has failed. The object was not there. I went back to my office, opened the collections management software, pulled up the catalogue record, and clicked through to the attached photographic record. This was where my clean track record made a small, precise sound as it cracked down the middle. The photographic record for CDW -1987-0042 contained 11 images, a full documentation set, front, back, three-quarter, detail of base, detail of upper section, and a scale reference shot. The images were digital scans of original photographs, logged as digitized in 2018 as part of the digitization project's backlog catch-up. The scans were clear. The object was clearly visible in all 11 of them. It was pale, almost white. Approximately the dimensions listed: cylindrical, smooth, without obvious seams or decoration. It looked, if I am being honest, like something you might find in an artist's studio as a compositional placeholder, a thing that existed to occupy space in a frame. I cross-referenced its shelf position in the images against the current storage map. The images showed it on the correct shelf, correctly positioned, with its accession label visible in the corner of the frame. I had just stood in front of that shelf. There had been nothing there except the label. I performed my standard secondary check. I walked the shelf location a second time, this time without my notes, just looking. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the shelf. Then I looked at the picture. The object was in the photograph. It was right there, in the image on my phone screen, pale and cylindrical and approximately 22 centimeters tall, sitting exactly where the accession label said it should be. I could see the label beside it. I could see the objects on adjacent shelves. I lowered my phone and looked at the shelf directly. Nothing. I raised my phone. The object appeared in the viewfinder, centered on shelf 3, sitting calmly in the flat institutional light. I lowered my phone. The shelf was empty, except for the label. I stood there for a moment, which was probably about 30 seconds, and felt like considerably longer. Then I did what a well-trained collections registrar does when something does not make immediate sense. I wrote down exactly what I observed. I assigned it a discrepancy flag in the catalogue record, and I went to find Hector. Chapter 2. The photography bay. Hector Reyes was the museum's primary collection photographer and imaging technician, the person responsible for all official documentation photography, condition report images, and exhibition photography. He had been at the museum for 11 years, which was 5 years longer than me, and he had the specific relaxed competence of someone who has been doing precise technical work long enough to find it genuinely meditative rather than stressful. He was 43. He had a daughter named Sophia who had just started college, a fact he mentioned approximately once a week with the particular mixture of pride and bewilderment of a parent who cannot quite believe they produced a functional adult. I found him in the photography bay, adjusting the lighting rig for what looked like a new acquisition, a set of decorative tiles wrapped in archival tissue on the shooting table. "I need you to look at something," I said. Hector had been doing this long enough to recognize the tone. He set down the reflector card and followed me without asking why. I showed him the shelf. I showed him my phone photograph of the shelf. I asked him what he saw. He looked at the shelf for a while. Then he looked at the phone. Then he looked at the shelf again. His expression did not change much, but I noticed his jaw set slightly, the way it does when he is working through a problem he doesn't have an immediate answer to. "Lens artifact," he said. "I thought of that," I said. "But it has parallax." He took my phone and moved it slowly sideways, watching the screen. In the viewfinder, the object's apparent position shifted relative to the shelving behind it, the way a real three-dimensional object shifts in perspective when you move around it. A lens artifact would stay fixed relative to the frame. "That is not an artifact," he said. He handed me my phone. He went back to the photography bay without another word and came back 2 minutes later with a Canon DSLR and a mirrorless Sony. He photographed the shelf with both cameras. He showed me the results on the Canon's rear screen first. Then the Sony's. The object was visible in every image. Hector was quiet for a moment. He had a habit, when something was bothering him, of very carefully not touching his face, as if keeping his hands still was a way of keeping his thoughts organized. "Different sensor types," he said. "Canon uses a Bayer filter array. Sony mirrorless uses a different spectral sensitivity curve. Your phone has its own imaging stack," he paused. "It shows up on all three." "Yes, but not to our eyes." "Correct." He looked at the shelf one more time. "Does it show up in the original documentation photographs?" "The scans. 11 images, present in all of them." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "Let's go back to the bay." In the photography bay, under the flat, shadowless light of the documentation setup, I placed the empty shelf board, accession label attached, on the shooting table, and Hector photographed it from every angle. In every photograph, something pale and cylindrical sat on the board. From directly above, you could see the upper surface of the object, smooth, without any visible seam or marking, slightly concave at the top, like a vessel that had been sealed. Hector pulled up the images on the bay's monitor and zoomed in. No thermal shimmer, he said. No focus inconsistency. Whatever this is, the camera is responding to it as if it is a solid, opaque, physical object. He leaned back. Which means it either is a solid, opaque, physical object, or it is somehow producing exactly the right optical response to fool 3 different imaging systems into treating it as one. Or, I said, it is a solid, opaque, physical object that we can't see. Hector looked at me for a moment. Yeah, he said. Or that. I logged the session in the Bay use book. Date, accession number, equipment used, personnel present. I noted, object photographed but not visually confirmed at shelf location or on shooting table. Images attached to the record. I flagged the record as pending resolution and went back to my office. It was 2 in the afternoon. I had 4 hours left in my workday and no procedural mechanism for what I had just documented. Chapter 3. Accession Archaeology. The first thing you learn in collections management is that the object is never the whole story. The object is the end point of a chain of custody, and the chain is where the truth lives. Who made it? Who owned it? How it moved? What it was used for? Why did someone decide it was worth preserving? I spent the rest of that afternoon and most of the following morning pulling the full acquisition file for CDW-1987-0042. The file was thin. This was unusual for 1987. By then, the museum had formalized its acquisition procedures to the point where a typical donation file would include a cover letter or correspondence from the donor, an appraisal document, a deed of gift form, and a completed condition report signed by the receiving registrar. CDW-1987-0042's file contained a single acquisition sheet with the donor listed as Vaulted Holdings, LLC, a post office box address in Columbus that no longer existed when I checked. No appraiser's name, no deed of gift, and a condition report. The condition report was handwritten. The handwriting was not in the style of any of the 3 registrars who had held my position between 1985 and 1992, all of whose handwriting I had encountered in other files. It was neat, compressed, slightly formal. The handwriting of someone who had been taught to write carefully rather than someone who had developed their own style. The condition report noted the object's dimensions, its approximate weight, its general description, and its storage location. In the field for notable conditions or handling requirements, it said, "Object responds to documentation. Handle accordingly." I read that line 3 times. I wrote it in my notebook. Then I cross-referenced the 1987 acquisition intake log to see what else had come in the same day. 4 other objects, all donated by Vaulted Holdings LLC, all entered on the same sheet in the intake log, in the same compressed handwriting. Their accession numbers ran sequentially, CDW-1987-0038 through CDW-1987-0042. 5 objects total, all described as mixed media composite, exact composition undetermined. All are classified as stable. All are assigned to Wing 2 deep storage. I pulled their catalog records. 3 of the 4 CDW-1987-0038, CDW-1987-0039, and CDW-1987-0041 had photographic documentation on file. I opened each record and looked at the images. Pauses, they were different. Not dramatically different. They were all pale, all roughly cylindrical, all smooth and without obvious features. But they varied in height, in proportional ratio, in the subtle geometry of their upper surfaces. CDW-1987-0038 was slightly taller and narrower. CDW-1987-0041 was shorter, almost squat, with an upper surface that appeared more steeply concave than the others. I went to their shelf locations. I brought my phone. At each shelf, I confirmed the accession label was present, and the shelf appeared empty to my direct observation. At each shelf, I raised my phone and photographed. CDW-1987-0038, visible in the photograph. CDW-1987-0039, visible in the photograph. CDW-1987-0041, visible in the photograph. I stood in the aisle between the cabinet rows in Wing, W, Audit, Stora, Gij, and held my phone, and looked at 3 photographs of 3 objects I could not see. The cold in deep storage is specific. It is not the cold of an air-conditioned room. It doesn't smell like refrigerated air or carry that antiseptic edge. It is the cold of a space that has been kept consistently below 55 degrees Fahrenheit for decades, that smells like aged wood and old metal and something faintly alkaline that I had always attributed to the archival materials. The acid-free tissue, the buffered board, the conservation-grade adhesives. I had worked in this space for 6 years and found the smell familiar and almost comforting. Standing in that aisle with 3 photographs of invisible objects on my phone screen, I noticed for the first time that the alkaline smell was strongest near the shelves where the 1987 objects were stored. I had not noticed that before. I checked for CDW -1987 -040. Its catalogue record had no photographic documentation on file. The digitization project had flagged it as images pending, physical review required, which meant, in the language of the underfunded backlog, that someone had pulled the file and found no original prints or slides to scan, and had logged it as a gap to be filled during the next physical audit. The next physical audit was this one, currently in progress. CDW -1987 -040 shelf location was W2C, row 4, shelf 1, the same cabinet row as the others, but the lowest shelf. When I went to it, I found the accession label. I found, on the shelf beside the label, a gap in the arrangement of surrounding objects that suggested something had been sitting there for a long time and had been recently moved. The slight discoloration of the shelf board where an object had rested, slightly paler than the wood around it, is the way carpet holds the shape of furniture after the furniture is gone. CDW -1987 -040 had a label and an empty shelf and a ghost of itself pressed into the wood. I photographed the shelf anyway. The object was not visible in the photograph. CDW -1987 -0040 was the only one of the 5 that was genuinely absent. I stood with my clipboard and did not know how to log that. Chapter 4. Dev calls on Sunday. My brother Dev is 4 years younger than me and works for a company that makes industrial optical sensors, the kind embedded in manufacturing equipment to detect surface defects, measure tolerances, and confirm alignment. He is better at the sciences than I am and has never once made me feel bad about that, which is either a mark of good character or of deep obliviousness, and I have decided over the years that it doesn't matter which. He calls on Sunday evenings, usually around 7, usually from his kitchen, because he cooks on Sundays and likes to talk while he cooks. I can always tell what he is making by the background sounds. The Sunday I called him back mid-week after the audit, he was making something that involved a lot of knife work, which meant he was paying approximately 70% attention to what I was saying. "Okay, weird work thing," I said, hypothetically. "Is this about the weird shelf thing? I told you about the shelf thing. You mentioned it last Sunday. You said there was an object in the photos that you couldn't find. I assumed you'd found it by now." "I haven't found it," I said. "I found 4 of them." The knife sound stopped. I described the situation in as technical terms as I could manage, which felt better than describing it in any other kind of terms. The cameras, the parallax, the 3 different sensor types, the consistency across the 5 objects. Dev was quiet for a moment. "Okay," he said, "so this could theoretically be a spectral reflectance issue. Some materials, certain composites, certain coatings, reflect wavelengths outside the visible spectrum, but within the sensitivity range of digital camera sensors, ultraviolet and near-infrared mostly. The human eye is essentially bandpass filtered for roughly 380 to 700 nanometers. Digital sensors, depending on the manufacturer and whether the infrared cut filter has been modified or degraded, can be sensitive to a broader range. So the objects could be reflecting light we can't see, theoretically. It would be unusual for a naturally occurring material. It would be less unusual for something engineered. Some retroflective coatings work on similar principles, but those are usually designed for visibility, not invisibility. What are they in terms of provenance? Unknown mixed media composite, exact composition undetermined. Knife sounds resumed. Here is the thing, though. If something is engineered to be invisible to human visual perception but visible to machine sensors, If that is an intentional property, not an accident, the engineering is almost certainly not the interesting part. The interesting part is why you'd need that property. What are they doing in a museum? I didn't have an answer. I said goodnight. I told him I'd see him at Thanksgiving. I meant it sincerely, the way you mean things sincerely when you still believe you will be present at future events. Chapter 5. The fifth object, CDW -1987-040. The one that was genuinely absent from its shelf had a second location listed in the catalogue record. A note added in 2009 by a previous registrar indicating that the object had been transferred to extended storage. W3. Sub. Per the director's instruction. The notation was minimal, unsigned beyond initials I didn't recognize, and W3 sub did not appear on any storage map I had access to. I knew Wing 3 existed. Wing 3 was the museum's oldest storage area, occupying the sub-basement beneath the 1961 original building footprint. It had been decommissioned as primary storage in the 1990s when Wing 2 was expanded and climate-controlled, and its official use since then was documented as mechanical access only. HVAC, electrical, plumbing. The staff entrance to Wing 3 was in the East Service Corridor, through a fire door labeled Maintenance, authorized personnel only, a door I had walked past hundreds of times and never had reason to open. I opened it on a Thursday morning before anyone else arrived. The stairwell was concrete and narrow and lit by fluorescent tubes, one of which was cycling, brightening and dimming in a slow rhythm that made the walls look like they were breathing. The air changed immediately colder, the alkaline quality stronger, a note underneath it that I identified as old steel and old stone. The stairs went down one full level and ended at a second fire door, this one without a label. I pushed it open. The space beyond was not what I expected. I had imagined a mechanical room, pipes, tanks, ducts, the infrastructure of a building's utilities. What I found was a room roughly 40 feet by 60, with concrete walls and a poured concrete floor, lit by the same fluorescent tubes as the stairwell, all of them functional. The room had shelving. Not utility shelving, the same style of archival steel shelving as Wing 2, the same configuration of uprights and shelf boards, the same dimensional tolerances. The shelving filled approximately 2/3 of the room, arranged in rows, the rows dense with objects I could not see. I raised my phone. Pause in the photograph on my screen. The room was full. The shelving held dozens of objects, pale, cylindrical, ranging in height and proportion, and they were arranged with the same density as a well-organized storage area, each sitting on its shelf board, none of them labeled. There was no accession numbering that I could see in the photographs. There was no system I could identify. They were simply present, filling the rows, occupying the space. I lowered my phone and stood in a room that, to my eyes, was full of empty shelves. I stayed there for perhaps 2 minutes. I was aware of my breathing, which had become shallow without my noticing. I was aware of the cold, which was 4 or 5 degrees colder than Wing 2. I was aware of the click of the fluorescent tubes. Then I noticed the orientation. In every photograph I took, from the doorway, from the left side, from the right side, the objects on the shelves were facing the same direction, not facing me specifically, facing the stairwell door I had entered through. The concave upper surfaces of the objects, the slight geometric differentiation that I'd noted in the 5 catalogued objects, all tilted or angled or simply positioned so that their openings, if that is what the concavities were, faced the door, I thought, attentive. The word came to me without my choosing it, and then I did not think about it again because I did not like it. I walked quickly back to the stairwell and up the stairs and through the fire door into the East Service Corridor. I logged my temperature reading in my pocket notebook, standard procedure both before and after, and noted that I had forgotten to take the before reading, which I had never done before in 6 years. Chapter 6. Hector doesn't come in. Hector called in sick the next morning. This was not unusual. He averaged 3 or 4 sick days a year, always when his daughter was visiting, and he wanted an unscheduled day with her. I noted it, didn't think much of it, and opened the collections management software to begin attaching the W3 sub-photographs to the CDW -1987-0040 record. Dr. Sandoval's email arrived at 8:47. Dr. Sandoval was the museum's director, late 50s, formerly an art historian, who had made the career transition into administration and had the specific intellectual restlessness of a person who is good at a job they did not originally want. He was not unkind. He was careful. He was the kind of administrator who thought of institutions as living things that could be damaged, and he treated potential damage with the focused attention of a physician. He had promoted the previous registrar, not me, and when she left for a position at a larger museum, he had hired me into the role without enthusiasm, and had since treated me with the respect of someone correct about a hire they made reluctantly. His email said, "Miriam, I understand you are mid-audit. Could you send me your current notes and any flagged discrepancies at your earliest convenience? The board's finance committee is meeting at the end of the month, and I'd like to have a preliminary summary ready. Thanks, G.S." This was 2 weeks earlier than he had ever asked for preliminary audit notes. I sat with that for a moment. I replied that I'd have something for him by the end of the day. Then I called the extension listed in the staff directory for Hector's emergency contact line. His direct desk line, which staff was supposed to be able to use for collections even when he was out. It rang. Not a busy signal, not voicemail. It rang continuously for 2 full minutes before I hung up. A line that rings without connecting, without routing to any automated system, without resolving in either direction. I noted this as a potential phone system issue and logged a maintenance request, because that is what you do. Then I attached the W3 sub-photographs to CDW -1987 -0040's record, saved the record, and went to lunch. When I came back, the photographs were gone. Not deleted. The image count on the record still showed 3 photos, but clicking each one opened only a white field and the error message. File not accessible. Permissions required. Contact the system administrator. The 3 images had been moved to a restricted archive folder. I did not have access to restricted archive folders. The system log for the record showed the images had been moved at 11:43 while I was eating a sandwich in the break room. I sat at my desk for a while. Then I opened my sent email and drafted a response to Sandoval's audit request. I attached my notes on CDW -1987 -0042 and the Wing 2 object. I did not mention W3 sub. I did not mention the 5 photographs currently inaccessible in a restricted archive. I wrote a clean, factual summary that described a single anomaly in the photographic documentation of 1 object and 4 related objects showing the same anomaly, flagged as pending resolution. I sent it and waited. Sandoval replied 12 minutes later, "Thank you. Please hold further documentation on these objects pending a meeting. I'll find time this week. GS, not, let me know if you need anything. Not interesting. What do you make of it? Just hold further documentation." I went home that evening and lay awake for a long time. I thought about the word attentive and tried to replace it with better words: oriented, positioned, arranged. All of these were accurate, and none of them was better. Chapter 7, Spectral Reflectance. I called Dev on a Tuesday, which was unusual enough that he answered with "Is everything okay?" "I need to ask you something technical," I said, "about what you said last time, about spectral reflectance and invisible objects." "Okay. You said that if something is engineered to be invisible to human eyes, but visible to machine sensors, the engineering probably isn't the interesting part. The interesting part is why you'd need that." "Right. Walk me through why you'd need that." Dev set something down. I heard the quiet of his kitchen, the refrigerator hum. "Okay, so if you want an object to go unnoticed by human observers in a human-occupied space, not just unseen, but genuinely below the threshold of human perception, you could engineer its surface to reflect only outside the human visible range. It would be physically present. It would interact with the environment normally. It would register on cameras and sensors, but people would walk right past it without registering it. Why would you want that? Depends on what the object does. What could it do? A pause. I mean, theoretically. If it is an observational or sensing instrument, if it is designed to record something or measure something or respond to something, you'd want it to be invisible to the things it is observing. That is basic surveillance logic. A sensor that its subjects can't see is a more accurate sensor. I let that settle. If they've been in a museum for 37 years, I said carefully, in a controlled environment, temperature maintained, undisturbed. Then whatever they're doing, they've been doing it for 37 years, Dev said, in a controlled environment, undisturbed. Another pause. "Miriam, where exactly are these objects?" "In a museum," I said. "Don't worry about it." Pause after I hung up. I sat in my car in the parking lot outside my apartment building and thought about W3 sub. dozens of objects, arranged on unlabeled shelving. In a room that had been maintained for climate control since at least 1987, in the sub-basement of a public building visited by approximately 40,000 people a year. The word surveillance was too simple. It implied a specific agency, a specific purpose, a recipient for whatever was being recorded. I didn't have any of that. What I had was a room full of objects that could see everything in the room without being seen themselves. And I had been in that room, and I had been seen. I did not know if that mattered. I went inside, made dinner, watched television, and felt the questions sitting at the back of my skull, like a stone that had not yet decided to fall. Chapter 8. The report that isn't filed. I went back to W3, sub the following morning before the building opened, through the side entrance that required a key code rather than a key card. A habit I had developed years ago when I sometimes came in early to work on the digitization backlog without logging the overtime. A workaround that had become second nature, and that had the advantage, I now understood, of not registering my arrival in the building access log. I had not told Hector. I had not told Sandoval. I had not logged the visit in the end-of-day checkout procedure, because I did not check out through the front desk when I used the side entrance. I had my personal phone. In W3, everything appeared to my direct observation as it had before. Empty shelves, cold air, flat fluorescent light. The alkaline smelled stronger than I had remembered. I raised my phone and confirmed that the room was, in the photographic record, densely occupied. I moved through the rows slowly, photographing as I went, trying to build a systematic record of what the cameras could see. I was looking for anything that the first visit had caused me to miss. Markings, groupings, variations in arrangement that might suggest function. What I found instead was the orientation. It was visible in the photographs in a way I had registered but not passed during my first visit. The objects were not simply facing the stairwell door. They were facing it with a consistency that was more precise than any arrangement a human curator would produce. Evenly spaced, uniformly angled, as if they had been calibrated to the geometry of the room. The concave upper surfaces, visible in the photographs, were all tilted at the same angle. 15 degrees, maybe, a slight tilt, upward and toward the door. I thought about what Dev had said. A sensor that its subjects can't see is a more accurate sensor. I photographed a full row, then turned to the mechanical shelf along the east wall, a utility rack, the kind used in building maintenance, holding the HVAC control box, a fire suppression inspection tag, and a bundled electrical conduit. On the bottom shelf of the utility rack behind the conduit bundle, I found a 3-ring binder with a water-damaged cover labeled, in faded type, W3, Sub-Maintenance Log, Authorized Access Only. I opened it. The log covered 35 years. Each entry noted a visit date, a temperature reading taken and confirmed, a climate system check, and a final column headed orientation confirmed with a checkbox beside it. Every entry had the checkbox marked. Every entry. 35 years of quarterly visits, logged by 3 sets of rotating initials, ESR, ML, and DV, cycling through the entries with no explanation of what the rotation meant, confirming, each visit, that the objects were still facing the right direction. The most recent entry was 8 weeks ago. Initials, DV temperature confirmed, climate system operational, orientation confirmed, checkbox marked. I stood with the binder open and thought about what it meant to check, every 3 months for 35 years, that these objects were still facing the stairwell door, not the room, not each other, the door, the point of entry for any human presence. If they were sensing instruments, oriented toward the known point of human approach, then every person who had come down those stairs since 1987 had been observed by something they couldn't see, including me. Twice. I put the binder back exactly where I found it. I photographed it in place, then photographed the utility rack, then photographed the stairwell door from across the room from the perspective of the front row of shelving. In that last photograph, the objects in the front row were clearly visible, pale and cylindrical, oriented toward the door. And in that last photograph, the front row was closer to the camera than it had been in any of my previous photographs of the same wall. I checked the previous photographs. I had taken them from the same position. The front row was closer to the camera. I left. I took the stairs 2 at a time. I did not take my temperature reading. I drove to work, parked, and sat in my car and told myself there was a rational explanation, that I had been standing in a different position, that parallax accounted for it, that the objects had not moved. I told myself this with reasonable conviction for about 4 minutes. Then I went inside and requested a meeting with Dr. Sandoval. Chapter 9. What Sandoval knows. He met with me at 10. His office had the specific tidiness of a person who is anxious and expresses it through control of their immediate environment. The desk surface, clear except for a laptop and a single legal pad. The shelves behind him organized by height and color. The plants on the windowsill, the kind that require very little and forgive neglect. He closed the door when I came in, which he did not normally do for routine meetings. I said, I need to talk about W3. Sub. His expression did not change. That was itself information. I've been there, I said, twice. I know about the objects, I know about the maintenance log. I know the 1987 acquisition was a fabrication to give them a paper trail. Sandoval looked at me for a long moment. His hands were flat on the desk, his fingers slightly spread, the posture of someone who has decided not to fidget. How much have you documented? He said. No. He breathed out slowly. He was not the director who had commissioned W3, Sub, or the 1987 cover story. I understood that in the way you understand things, that you realize you should have understood earlier. He had inherited this. However long ago, this had been handed to him along with the director's key and the board expectations and the grant applications, wrapped in the same institutional continuity that had been wrapping it since before he arrived. Sit down, he said. I sat. He took a long time organizing what he was going to say. I respected that, even then. They came with the building, he said finally. The original 1961 construction during site preparation. A contractor encountered the sub-basement. It wasn't in the original plans. The architect of record did not know of it. The objects were already there, already arranged. The decision made at the time was not to report them because the decision-makers did not know what reporting would accomplish and were concerned about what it might attract. Attract, I said. Attention, he said carefully. Certain kinds of attention to a building that was going to be open to the public. When was the 1987 acquisition created? A previous director commissioned it after a consultant, someone with, I was told, relevant expertise, advised that the objects needed to be in the collection record in some form to provide a legal and institutional framework for their continued presence in the building. The alternative was to move them, and the same consultant strongly advised against that. Why? Sandoval looked at me steadily. The one object that was moved, he said, in 1961, during the site work, was placed in a storage room in the contractor's yard. The contractor's foreman reported it missing the following morning. It was found 3 days later in the storage room, back in its original position. He paused. The contractor did not re-enter the sub-basement after that. Neither did anyone else until the maintenance protocol was established in 1987. The room was very quiet. The maintenance log, I said. The orientation checks. The understanding, Sandoval said, passed from director to director, is that they remain oriented toward the door, toward the entry point. We have been told, and I want to be precise, I have been told, second-hand, from a document I was given when I assumed this role, that as long as they remain oriented toward the entry point, they remain in the room. And if they don't, he was quiet. What am I not supposed to photograph? I said. He looked at me directly. Nothing that leaves the building, he said. The original understanding is that the photographic record stays within the institution, the images we have on file, the digitized documentation, all of it stays on internal servers, behind the institutional firewall within the physical building if possible. The understanding is that an image of the object that exists in the building is. He stopped. Is what? Is no longer simply a record, he said. Pause. I said nothing. I was thinking about cloud backup. I was thinking about automatic sync. I was thinking about every photograph I had taken on my personal phone. I need to ask you again, Sandoval said. How much have you documented, and where is it? I'll let you know, I said. I stood up. Thank you for telling me. I walked out of his office and down the hall to my desk, sat down, opened the settings on my phone, navigated to the cloud storage app, and checked the backup status. Last synced yesterday, 11:58 p.m. Every photograph I had taken in W3. Sub was in the cloud. Chapter 10. The images leave the building. I spent the rest of that day doing the procedural work I was supposed to be doing. I finished the audit section for the pre-negative 1900 ceramic collection. I responded to a loan request inquiry from a partner institution. I attended a brief all-staff meeting about the upcoming holiday exhibition installation. I did not tell Sandoval about the cloud backup. I told myself I needed to think about what to do before I told anyone anything. I told myself that telling Sandoval immediately would result in the decision being made for me. I told myself that keeping the photographs was itself a kind of power, however unclear the situation was. These were all true things. They were not the real reason I didn't tell him. The real reason was simpler, and I was not ready to look at it directly. I needed the photographs to exist somewhere outside the building because something inside the building had already tried to erase them from the inside. I drove home. I made dinner. I called Dev and did not tell him about Sandoval's meeting. I watched television and felt the photograph sitting in the cloud the way you feel a set of keys in your pocket. The constant, reassuring weight of something you haven't lost yet. At 11:30, I opened the cloud storage app on my phone to look at the W3 sub-photographs. Most of them were white, not deleted, present, numbered, and time-stamped in the correct sequence. But the image data was gone, replaced with a flat, featureless white field, as if the photographs had been developed in too much light, as if exposure had burned them out from the inside. 41 of the 43 photographs I had taken in W3 sub were white. 2 remain. Onan was the photograph of the maintenance log, still legible, still showing the orientation confirmed column and the 35 years of check marks. The other was the last photograph I had taken in the room, the one from the position near the stairwell door, looking across the front row of shelving toward the far wall. The one where the front row appeared closer to the camera than in the previous frames. I opened that photograph and expanded it. The front row was still closer to the camera than it should have been. But that was not what I was looking at now. I was looking at the upper right corner of the frame. In the background, visible past the end of the shelving rows, was the stairwell door I had entered through. I had not been facing the stairwell door when I took this photograph. I had been facing the far wall. The door appeared in the upper right corner because it was at the edge of the frame, visible only because of the wide angle of my phone's lens. In the photograph, the stairwell door was partially open. I had closed it when I entered. I was certain of this. I had pulled it shut behind me, heard it latch, turned, and walked into the room. I remembered the sound. The door was partially open in the photograph, pushed from the room side into the stairwell. Open about 6 inches. I had been the only person in that building. I sat with the photograph for a long time. I zoomed into the gap in the doorway. The stairwell beyond the door was lit by the fluorescent tubes, the same stuttering light I'd walked down through. In the gap, the stairwell was visible, a concrete wall, the edge of the handrail. And in the gap, close to the door, at roughly counter height, something pale. I could not see the detail at this resolution, at this zoom level. I could not confirm the shape or dimension, but something pale was visible in the gap of the stairwell door in a photograph taken from across the room while I was facing the opposite direction. A photograph whose timestamp placed it 5 seconds before the last image in my sequence, which was from the same position, with the door fully closed. The stairwell door was closed in the last photograph. It was open 5 seconds earlier. Something pale was visible in the gap. It had been behind me when I took that photograph. It had been in the stairwell, 6 inches from the room, 5 seconds before I walked back up those stairs. Pause. I put my phone face down on my coffee table. I thought about the object that had been moved in 1961, found back in its original position 3 days later. I thought about what Sandoval had said, as long as they remain oriented toward the entry point, they remain in the room. I thought about my phone, the cloud backup, and what Sandoval had said about an image that exists in the building. I picked my phone back up. I opened the last photograph, the one with the door closed, the room as I had last seen it, the front row of shelving closer than it should have been. I zoomed into the front row. The objects in the front row were not oriented toward the stairwell door. They were oriented toward the camera. I had broken the fence, not by going into the room. By taking photographs on a phone connected to a network outside the building, the images had carried something out, a location, a position, the equivalent of a return address on a letter, written in a language I didn't speak. Cake, but something else could read perfectly well. I thought, it knows where I am. And then, because the sentence wasn't quite right, I corrected it. It already knew where I was. The image was sent 30 hours ago. Chapter 11. The morning after I did not sleep. I moved through my apartment with every light on, checking each room in a pattern that became more systematic as the night went on, until I was performing what I can only describe as a room-by-room survey every 40 minutes. Not because I expected to find anything, but because movement felt preferable to stillness, and because checking felt preferable to not knowing. I am a person who resolves discrepancies. I am not a person who sits with them. By 5 in the morning, I had confirmed, in 40-minute intervals, that my apartment contained the expected number of visible objects. I was aware that visibility was no longer a reliable criterion. I called Dev at 6, which was early enough that he answered with immediate concern. I told him everything, all of it. The W3 sub-room, the maintenance log Sandoval's meeting, and the photographs. His offhand comment about surveillance and sensors, and the engineering not being the interesting part. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. "Miriam," he said, carefully, "I know. You need to not be alone tonight. You need to, I know, I am coming to you." I had decided this somewhere around 3 in the morning and had not said it aloud until now, and saying it out loud made it real in a way that helped. "I can be there by late afternoon if I drive." "Yes," he said, immediately, no hesitation. "Yes, come here, come now." I packed a bag. I sent an email to Sandoval that said only, "I need to take a few personal days. Will explain when I return." I looked at the cloud backup on my phone and saw that the 2 remaining photographs were still present. The maintenance log and the last frame from W3 sub. I did not delete them. I thought about deleting them for a long time and decided that destroying evidence, even evidence I didn't fully understand, was not something I was willing to do yet. I drove to Dev's 7 ending and Sting. I stayed with Dev for 11 days. I went back to Caldwell because I had a lease and a salary, and because staying away felt like a form of giving up that I was not willing to perform. Sandoval and I had a meeting in which he said very little, and I said very little, and we arrived at a professional understanding that the W3 sub-situation had been managed, and that my audit notes on CDW -1987 -0042 and its related objects would be filed as discrepancy resolved. Objects confirmed present via photographic documentation only. Physical confirmation pending further review, which is the collections management equivalent of a file folder that nobody opens again. Hector came back to work the week after I returned. He did not ask about the audit. I did not ask where he had been. We worked together in the careful way of 2 people who have looked at the same thing from different distances and arrived at an agreement not to discuss the distance. The 2 remaining photographs are still in my cloud backup. I have not deleted the M, and I have not looked at them again. I keep the cloud storage app closed. I do not know if it matters. My apartment has 41 objects that I have physically confirmed, with my hands, are present in the positions where I last placed them. I do not know how long I will keep doing this. I do not know if I will stop. The maintenance log in W3 sub showed 3 sets of initials over 35 years. Last week I found in the institutional personnel directory that the current facilities manager's last name begins with V. I have not done anything with this information. I have written it in my pocket notebook, which I still carry. The discrepancy report for CDW -1987 -0042 is still open in the collections management system. I have been the only person with access to it who has not closed it. I will not close it. It is the only institutional trace of what I found, and I am not willing to file it away. I know where everything is. That is still my job. What I don't know, and what I suspect I am not supposed to know, is whether everything knows where I am. Pause. The last photograph is still there. I haven't looked at it in 6 weeks. But last night, for the first time since I came back from Dev's, I heard the sound that the collections management software makes when it loads an image. That soft, repeating click, and I had not opened the software. I had not opened any software. My laptop was closed on the kitchen table. The sound came from the corner of my bedroom, near the window, in the dark. It came twice. Then it stopped. I left the lights on.